Picture this. The throne room of Emperor Valorak, ruler of the Zenithian Collective, spreads across a space station the size of a small moon. It's got everything you'd expect from an intergalactic despot who spent the last 3,000 years convincing himself he's better than everyone else. Massive, crystalline pillars. Holographic displays flickering with the conquered territories of lesser species. And sitting right in the middle of this ridiculously ostentatious hall is Valorak himself, perched on a throne that could probably be seen from orbit. The guy's got 4 arms, skin that shimmers like an oil slick, and an ego that somehow manages to be even larger than his actual physical form. The human delegation stands before him like we're about to hear the worst news of our lives. We are. Standing at the front is Marcus Rivera, humanity's envoy to the Zenithian Collective. Marcus is the kind of guy who looks perpetually amused by everything, even when the fate of the human species hangs in the balance. Brown skin, sharp eyes that miss nothing, and a smile that says he's already figured out the punchline to a joke nobody else has heard yet. He's wearing the standard diplomatic suit, pressed to perfection, but it can't hide the fact that Marcus treats this whole meeting like he's about to watch a comedy special. Valorak leans forward, all 4 arms gesturing dramatically as he speaks. His voice sounds like an orchestra warming up, if the orchestra hated you personally. The planet Kasara, he announces, his words filling the chamber like toxic gas, is fundamentally unsuitable for any form of sentient habitation. My scientists have determined this beyond any possibility of error. It is a wasteland, a hellscape, a monument to nature's cruelty and the universe's indifference to life itself. The Zenithian Council erupts in agreement, their voices overlapping in that particular way that makes you realize they've practiced this chorus line before. They're all buying in completely. The planet is unlivable. Case closed. Don't even think about it. They present holographic projections of the planetary conditions, toxic clouds, raging storms, geological formations that look like alien nightmares came to life and decided to have a really bad day. But then, Valorak's massive eyes focus on Marcus, and he leans back in his throne with what can only be described as anticipatory satisfaction. And yet, the humans wish to attempt colonization. How delightfully naive, how wonderfully, almost painfully optimistic. The council laughs, these booming sounds that echo through the chamber. They think they're being clever. They think they've already won this argument before it even started. Marcus doesn't move. He just smiles wider. And then he asks the question that will define the next 6 months of galactic history. Your Majesty, Marcus says, his voice perfectly measured and pleasant. Before we get into the whole impossible thing, I have one small request. Valorak's expression shifts slightly. Not what he was expecting. Proceed, he says, clearly amused by whatever's about to come out of Marcus's mouth. Do you have a shovel? The silence that follows is so complete you could probably hear a pin drop, assuming anyone in this room actually knew what a pin was or what it sounded like when it fell. The council members exchange confused glances. Valorak's oil-slick skin darkens, which means he's actually processing genuine confusion for possibly the first time in recorded history. A shovel? Valorak repeats, like Marcus has asked him to explain the concept of taste in a universe built on different sensory organs entirely. Yeah, Marcus says, nodding. You know, for digging. It's a tool. We use them on Earth all the time. Humans love shovels. They're right up there with coffee and complaining about Monday for things that make us happy. And just like that, everything changes. The thing about Kasara is that it's not just bad. It's aggressively, enthusiastically bad in every conceivable way. It's like the planet woke up one morning and decided that life should be as difficult as possible, then doubled down on that commitment. Dr. Palmer Cross sits in the analysis lab aboard the human research vessel, scrolling through environmental data and eating what passes for lunch in space. Palmer's the kind of scientist who's seen so much geological chaos on Earth that alien nightmares just feel like a Tuesday. He's got the weathered face of someone who spent years in mining operations, the patient eyes of someone who understands that the universe doesn't owe you anything, and the dry sense of humor of someone who's learned that laughing beats crying every single time. The data streaming across his display is genuinely impressive in its hostility. The atmospheric pressure is nearly 3 times Earth standard, which means it's basically trying to compress your organs into quantum foam. The temperature fluctuates wildly, swinging from boiling to freezing within hours as the planet's orbit brings it closer to and further from its star. Then there's the acid rain. Oh, the acid rain. The stuff is so caustic, it eats through standard titanium alloys like they're made of paper. And scattered across the planet's surface are these massive crystalline formations that interfere with everything from communications to basic sensor equipment. And if that wasn't enough, the soil composition analysis reveals heavy metals in concentrations that would make Earth's worst industrial zones look like organic gardens. Palmer leans back in his chair and smiles. He's seen worse. Not often, but it's happened. Back in the Zenithian throne room, Emperor Valorak is presenting this entire nightmare scenario to the human delegation like he's reading a recipe for disaster. His council members nod along, completely convinced by their own argument. One of them, a Zenithian with crystalline growths along his face that probably indicate some form of academic achievement, stands and elaborates on each condition. The pressure alone, he explains, would crush human physiology. The acid rain would dissolve protective equipment. The crystalline formations would render any technology inoperable. The temperature swings would induce thermal shock in biological systems. It's a beautiful performance, really. The kind of presentation that makes you think these guys actually believe what they're saying, and maybe they do. The Zenithian Collective has conquered 100 worlds, all of them suitable, all of them pleasant, all of them environments where you don't need to fight the planet just to survive your first week. They've never had to deal with hostile terrain because they're the kind of civilization that just moves on to somewhere nicer. It's easier that way. It's definitely safer. Marcus sits through the entire presentation without moving, just absorbing the information and storing it away in that brain of his that never stops working. Palmer watches the data feeds, making notes, understanding the challenge. Meanwhile, Elena Rodriguez, the team's engineer and the kind of person who sees broken things and immediately starts mentally redesigning them, is already sketching ideas on her wristpad. Elena has got the kind of personality that makes people uncomfortable because she refuses to accept that anything is actually impossible. She grew up fixing equipment with whatever was available, making do with materials that weren't technically supposed to work together. She's got hands that are always moving, a mind that never stops running, and the kind of optimism that borders on actual delusion. Most people would look at Kasara's specifications and start planning their funeral. Elena looks at them and thinks about opportunities. When the Zenithian Council finally finishes their presentation, Marcus asks one simple question. How long have you known about Kasara? 3,000 years, Valorak responds proudly. Our initial survey teams determined its unsuitability in approximately 1 week. And you've just left it alone since then? Nobody's even tried? No sentient species would ever attempt such foolishness, the council spokesperson says. We are not fools. Marcus exchanges a look with Palmer and Elena, that look that says everything. The Zenithians haven't tried because they assumed it was impossible. They never even considered that impossible might just be a suggestion rather than a rule. Marcus and Palmer and Elena stand on the surface of Kasara for the first time, and it's exactly as hostile as the briefings promised. The ground beneath their feet is more rust than soil. The sky above is this sickly greenish-brown color, and you can actually see the acid rain falling in the distance like it's on a mission to ruin someone's day. Which it is. It's coming to ruin your day specifically. Palmer walks slowly across the terrain, studying the crystalline formations with the kind of attention usually reserved for ancient artifacts in museums. He's not looking at them as obstacles. He's looking at them like they're information, like they're telling him a story about how this planet works, if he's patient enough to listen. These formations, he says, running his fingers carefully across the surface, they're not random. Look at the pattern. They're growing in specific directions based on the electromagnetic fields. They're almost like the planet's immune system, like it's grown these structures to stabilize something. Elena's already kneeling in the soil, running samples through a portable analyzer. The heavy metals Palmer saw in the data. They're not randomly distributed. They're concentrated in specific areas, almost like someone organized them. almost like they're actually resources instead of contaminants. The acid rain, Elena says, her voice getting that excited tone that usually means she's about to propose something insane. It follows the crystalline formations. It's not random weather, it's cyclic. It repeats every 9.4 hours with mathematical precision. Marcus is recording everything, processing it, understanding the implications. So, Vallorak wasn't wrong, he says slowly. It is hostile. But it's not chaotic, it's predictable, it's a system. It's a puzzle, Palmer agrees, and puzzles have solutions. Over the next week, they begin working with what little equipment made it through the transport phase. Marcus coordinates the effort, making decisions, figuring out priorities. Palmer maps out the safe zones, identifying areas where the atmospheric pressure is lowest and the temperature variations are smallest. Elena starts engineering protective gear from salvaged Zenithian materials mixed with compounds they brought from Earth. The Zenithians watch from orbit, completely baffled by what they're seeing. The humans aren't trying to transform the planet. They're trying to understand it. They're studying the acid rain like it's a teacher instead of an enemy. They're treating the crystalline, formations like navigation aids instead of obstacles. They're looking at the heavy metals in the soil and wondering what you could do with them, instead of how to get rid of them. Elena develops a suit design that uses the crystalline formations as part of the protection system. Instead of trying to block the acid rain, she designs suits that work with it, using the chemical reactions to generate heat and power. Palmer discovers that the crystalline formations actually filter atmospheric toxins through a process he doesn't entirely understand yet but is definitely planning to exploit. Marcus organizes work teams, establishes schedules, figures out how to maintain morale among people working in an environment that's actively trying to kill them. A month passes. The Zenithian Council becomes increasingly annoyed. They're watching humans do impossible things, and they're not enjoying it. Vallorak demands status reports, probably hoping to hear that the human experiment has failed, and he can finally be proven right about Kasara being unlivable. But the reports keep coming back the same. The humans are alive. They're building structures. They're making progress. They're doing this thing that shouldn't be possible, and they're doing it while maintaining something that looks a lot like morale. Elena shows Marcus the prototype atmospheric processor she's designed. It's a massive structure, utilizes the planet's own acid rain as an energy source, and technically shouldn't work based on any standard engineering principles. Palmer presents maps showing safe zones that expand every day as they better understand the planetary cycles. Marcus takes it all in and smiles that smile again, the one that says he knew this was going to work all along. Nobody tells you about the feeling you get when you're about to fail in front of an audience that's already proven they don't believe in you. Marcus feels it in his chest like gravity got heavier. Palmer feels it in his hands, which are shaking slightly as he runs the calculations a third time. Elena feels it as a weight pressing down on her shoulders while she stares at the prototype that's supposed to save them, but instead might doom them. The acid rain intensifies beyond predictions, way beyond predictions. Palmer's models were solid, but they were missing a variable. The planet has seasonal variations that don't show up in short-term data. What they're experiencing is the equivalent of Kasara's monsoon season, and it came 3 weeks early. The protective barriers are holding, but barely. The damage assessment suggests that if this continues for another 48 hours, the entire settlement is going to be compromised. Back on the Zenithian station, Emperor Vallorak is practically glowing with vindication. He's called for a meeting with Marcus, and his tone suggests he's already planning his victory speech. The Emperor sits on his throne, all four arms folded in what might be satisfaction or might be how his species looks when they are being smug. Hard to tell. The humans have failed, Vallorak announces to his council. As was always inevitable, they will evacuate, Kasara will remain unlivable, and the natural order of the universe will be restored. But Marcus isn't evacuating. Marcus is in his quarters on the settlement, and he's thinking, actually thinking. The kind of thinking that happens when you've got nothing to lose and everything is about to explode anyway. Palmer and Elena are with him, and they're all staring at the data like it's about to tell them the secret to immortality if they just glare at it hard enough. Palmer suddenly sits up. Wait, Elena, what if we're thinking about this wrong? Wrong how? Elena asks, but she's already moving toward her workstation, already sensing where this is going. We've been trying to protect against the acid rain. We've been treating it as a problem. But what if it's not a problem? What if it's a solution? The realization hits them like revelation and stupidity combined. The acid rain, while destructive, follows specific chemical pathways. Palmer pulls up the atmospheric data, traces the reactions, and suddenly everything becomes clear. The acid rain is neutralizing toxins in the upper atmosphere. It's not adding to the hostility. It's actively reducing it in specific areas. The planet isn't trying to kill them with the rain. It's trying to heal itself. Elena's hands fly across her keyboard. She's redesigning the atmospheric processor on the fly, integrating it with the acid rain cycle instead of fighting against it. If this works, if the math holds, if reality decides to cooperate for once in their lives, they can use the rain to power an even more efficient system than they'd planned. They can accelerate the atmospheric cleanup process by months, maybe years. Marcus makes the call. Full redeployment of resources. They're not evacuating. They're going bigger. They're going all in. The next 18 hours are chaos. Organized chaos, the kind that humans are surprisingly good at managing when the alternative is extinction. Elena oversees the reconstruction of the atmospheric processor using new designs that basically violate several laws of physics. Palmer verifies the math 3 times, then a 4th time, just to be sure. Marcus coordinates everything, makes impossible decisions, and somehow keeps everyone believing that this is going to work, even though statistically, it probably shouldn't. And then they activate it. The atmospheric processor comes online like a sunrise, breaking through the clouds. Except there are no clouds, because the acid rain is now part of the solution. The crystalline formations light up in response to the new energy flow. The heavy metals in the soil start absorbing and filtering atmospheric contaminants in ways that Palmer didn't even know were possible. The whole system, the entire planet, starts working together like it's been waiting 3,000 years for someone to ask it the right question. Emperor Valorak watches the sensor data from orbit, and his skin loses all color, which, for a being whose skin is naturally shimmering like an oil slick, is actually quite noticeable. 6 months later, Kesara doesn't look like Kesara anymore. It looks like possibility. The human settlement expands from a tiny foothold into something that could almost be called a city. Protective barriers now cover entire districts instead of just individual structures. The acid rain still falls, but it's integrated into the infrastructure now. Collectors channel it to processing facilities. Heat exchangers use the chemical reactions to generate power. What was once the planet's most lethal feature has become one of its most valuable resources. Marcus walks through the main marketplace, and it's genuinely difficult to remember that 6 months ago, this was a barren hellscape. Vendors are selling goods at stalls made from processed crystalline formations. The stalls are light and stronger than titanium would have been. Humans and Zenithians are working side by side. The Zenithians are primarily here to observe and document what they still don't quite understand. But some of them are starting to ask questions. Some of them are starting to wonder if they've been missing something fundamental about problem solving. Palmer runs the Geological Survey Division now, a position he took despite multiple offers to return to Earth with medals and book deals. He's discovered that the heavy metals in the soil aren't just resources. They're the basis for alloys that don't exist anywhere else in the known galaxy. Stronger, lighter, more versatile than anything developed through thousands of years of Zenithian research. When they finally release the specifications to the wider galaxy, the pharmaceutical and engineering markets are going to explode. Kesara is going to become the single most valuable colony in human history. Elena leads the engineering department, and she's already planning Phase 2. If they can integrate the atmospheric processor with the planet's natural magnetic fields, they can establish permanent settlements in areas that are currently too hostile even for humans. She's drafting designs for subsurface cities that will use the planet as thermal energy as a power source. She proposes deep core mining operations that will tap into mineral deposits that nobody even knew existed. She's planning like someone who's looking at the next 100 years of development and ain't wait to get started. Other human teams arrive in shuttles, each one bringing specialized knowledge. Farmers discover that the soil, once properly treated, is incredibly fertile. Something about the heavy metal composition actually promotes plant growth in ways that Earth soil doesn't. They plant seeds, and within weeks they are harvesting crops that grow faster and stronger than anything they could produce back home. Agricultural scientists are baffled and delighted. Miners establish operations in the Western continent, where Palmer's surveys indicated massive veins of rare elements. They extract materials that would take Earth operations years to accumulate. The economic implications are so massive that galactic markets start pricing in future Kisara exports before they're even mined. Kisara transforms from the unlivable wasteland that Emperor Valorak was absolutely certain about into a thriving hub of commerce, research, and innovation. 3 universities are established. A medical research center opens to study the unique biological adaptations that humans are developing in response to Kisara's environment. Artists arrive and start creating works inspired by the planet's harsh beauty. Musicians compose symphonies dedicated to the sound of acid rain falling on crystalline formations. Marcus, Palmer, and Eleanor are offered everything you could possibly offer. Medals from Earth, honorary titles from the human government, cushy positions at research institutes. Elena gets multiple job offers from Zenithian research facilities, which is hilarious because the Zenithians are basically admitting they want to figure out how humans think. All 3 of them turn down most of it. They stay on Kisara because they can see where this is going and they want to be here for it. Marcus becomes the de facto governor of the colony, though he resists the official title because he says it sounds pretentious. Palmer continues his geological work, convinced there are still fundamental mysteries about the planet that they haven't figured out. Elena keeps building, keeps pushing boundaries, keeps proposing projects that technically shouldn't work but somehow do. Months become years. The settlement becomes a sprawl. Children are born on Kisara who have never seen Earth. They play in treated soil under skies that are becoming slowly, gradually, noticeably cleaner. Kisara is transforming from a hellscape into a home. And humanity is doing it with nothing more complicated than stubbornness, shovels, and the kind of optimism that refuses to accept that impossible means actually impossible. Emperor Valorak arrives on Kisara personally, which is an event significant enough that Marcus cancels most of his meetings to prepare for it. The Emperor descends from his shuttle in full ceremonial regalia, all 4 arms adorned with jewelry, his skin rippling with colors that probably indicate diplomatic formality or possibly indigestion. Hard to tell with Zenithians. Marcus meets him on the observation deck of the administrative building, which offers a view of the entire colony. It's not much compared to what Kisara will eventually become, but it's impressive for 6 months of work. The Emperor stares silently for a long moment, processing something. When he finally speaks, his voice is different from how it was in the throne room. Quieter, more like he's thinking out loud instead of performing for an audience. "I was wrong," Valorak says simply. Marcus doesn't respond immediately. He just nods, understanding the weight of those words coming from someone like the Emperor. In Zenithian culture, admitting error is apparently a significant thing. "We have conquered 100 worlds," Valorak continues, still staring at the colony. "All of them suitable, all of them requiring minimal adaptation. We assumed that if a world was difficult, it was not worth the effort. We assumed that superior technology meant superior decision-making. We were not always correct in these assumptions." "You weren't alone," Marcus says gently. "Most advanced civilizations probably would have made the same call. Kisara looks like a nightmare if you're trying to minimize risk and maximize efficiency. It doesn't look like an opportunity unless you're willing to be a little crazy about it." Valorak turns to face Marcus, and for the first time his expression seems genuinely contemplative. Humans approach problems differently. You see obstacles and you respond with stubbornness rather than logic. You commit to paths that calculation suggests should fail, and yet you succeed. We have studied this for millennia and never understood it. "We just refuse to accept that impossible means anything," Marcus says. "I mean, half the time we're probably wrong. Kisara is probably the exception, not the rule. But if we never tried the impossible things, we'd never figure out which ones aren't actually impossible." The Emperor is quiet for a moment, and then something that might be a smile appears on his face. I believe the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place, and significantly more difficult to predict. He pauses, then adds, "What made you think of the shovel?" Marcus laughs. Honestly, on Earth, when people are overwhelmed by a problem that seems impossible, we have this habit of just showing up with a shovel and starting to dig. Sometimes that's literally digging. Sometimes it's metaphorical. But the point is, we start working on it instead of debating whether it's theoretically possible. Shovels represent action. They represent refusing to give up. Plus, they're useful tools. Valorak nods slowly, processing this. "I would like to acquire a shovel," he says after a moment. "Perhaps it would be useful for addressing some of the difficulties my own worlds are experiencing. Perhaps your approach to problem-solving has merit that extends beyond Kesara." Marcus reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, ornate shovel that Elena designed as a souvenir for the diplomatic exchanges. It's made from processed Kesara crystalline material, beautiful and functional simultaneously. He hands it to Valorak. "Welcome to the club," Marcus says. "The club of people who choose to try instead of assume. Population keeps growing." Valorak accepts the shovel, and his skin shimmers with what might be genuine amusement. He looks at the shovel, then at the colony spreading across Kesara's landscape, then back at Marcus. "The universe just became significantly less predictable," he says. "I am not entirely certain how I feel about that." "Give it time," Marcus says. "Uncertainty usually leads to interesting things." As Valorak leaves the observation deck, shovel in hand, Marcus turns back to the view of Kesara's colony. The acid rain is falling in the distance, the crystalline formations are glowing with processing energy, and somewhere in the administrative building, Palmer is probably working on research that will change planetary engineering forever. Humanity succeeded where logic suggested failure. They arrived at a planet that was supposedly unlivable, and they didn't just survive. They built something, they transformed it, they did the impossible because they never really accepted that it was. And it all started with a shovel and a guy willing to ask for one.